My speaker is wide open.
Dile que sí, entonces vamos a... Ok. Bueno.
Wilmer, do you have my screen so you can at least see the presentation?
Well, okay. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for attending this webinar and this invitation. This is our second webinar of our series, Doing Development Differently. That is our wagger to the country offices in terms to increase the innovation into day-to-day work. So basically, as you already know, our goals is basically positioning the innovation into the country offices day-to-day work, providing practical tools for innovation that can be applied into the formulation of projects, and also introducing a disruptive perspective of thinking project formulation. So today, the thematic it's using new data sources to better implement and monitoring the SDGs. And we have a special key speaker who is Jennifer Colville. She's the innovation team leader of the Arab States Bureau. She has a great experience on data innovation, and it's a pleasure to count on her. Basically, I think we are going to have three questions for this webinar. The first question is going to be, what is exactly data innovation? The second question will be, why do we need data innovation at the UNDP level? And the third question is going to be, how can this information help us to achieve the SDG agenda? So this is a brief introduction. Thank you again, everybody, for joining this meeting, this webinar, and also thank you, Jennifer, for being here. We have an issue with her connection, so she can hear us, but so for that reason we have to type our question in the dashboard just on the webinar. So please, let's start again, Jennifer, and let's start.
Okay, hi everybody. Greetings from Amman, Jordan. This is Jennifer Colville. I manage UNDP's regional innovation portfolio in Arab states. I have not been able to hear what Fernando and Wilmer said as introduction, so I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat anything. And I'm sure they just said nice things about innovation in Arab states and all of that good stuff. But I do apologize that I can't hear anyone. So thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to talk with fellow social innovators around the world. I think one of the most kind of exciting and effective things that UNDP does on the innovation agenda is create a network, a strong network of innovation champions. The way we kind of share information, share successes, share missteps, provide each other kind of advice and moral support and encouragement as we go down this path of doing development differently is really important, and it's great to be able to share across regions. I've been in the Arab states for 2.5 years after having been in New York for a long time, and I had a global perspective there, and I know that it was very valuable for me to be able to take lessons and experiences from all different regions into the work that I do in Arab states. So it's great to be speaking with you. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just introducing the innovation facility. Again, I apologize if Wilmer and Fernando have already described the innovation facility, but I think it sets the context well for going into discussion about data innovation. So with that, UNDP launched its innovation facility in 2014. And it was really motivated by the fact that many of our country offices were looking for UNDP. They were in transition, some kind of transition, economic or political, social transition, and they were looking for UNDP to bring a new set of services to them, and innovation and all of the different methodologies and approaches associated with social innovation really seemed to be something that caught their eye, and they saw the value of it and saw the value of UNDP as a partner in social innovation. And so it led to the birth of the innovation facility in 2014, and you can see on this slide the kind of the scope of work that the innovation facility does, or the kinds of activities that the innovation facility does. And it's really first and foremost about looking out at the horizon and sometimes beyond the horizon to the best of our ability to find new ways of doing development. So whether that's reaching out to those who are marginalized or on the periphery, whether that's using technology, or new technologies, whether that's using behavioral sciences to better understand how people behave and nudge them towards more positive social behavior. It's finding those new approaches. It's finding those people who are breaking the barriers and the boundaries and working with them. And it's looking internally as well. And I think that's an important aspect to note, that many of our own country offices are the ones who are breaking barriers and doing development differently. And again, that comes back to why it's so important to be part of this innovation network and to be able to share across countries and regions. As many of you know, we also award some minimal seed funding to help country offices experiment with new kinds of approaches. And importantly is around this idea of creating new norms. So making innovation the kind of everybody's responsibility, part and parcel of what we do, rather than an add-on or something that we do in our spare time or just for fun or dabble, but really make it part of our culture and part of our processes, part of our reward system, so it really becomes integrated, and we continually reinvent ourselves and we continually strive to add value and be relevant in the international development context. Certainly the work that the Innovation Facility does sits at the heart of the 2030 Agenda. I think the majority, if not all, of the initiatives that the Innovation Facility has supported over the past 3 years sit squarely, since 2015, sit squarely in one or more of the Sustainable Development Goals. As certainly where we see kind of the potential for scaling up our initiatives. So I'll talk a little bit about one of the initiatives we have this year on SGG Tier 3 indicators, and we're hoping that the work that we do at the country level, kind of in a microcosm, really contributes to certainly the development of that country, but contributes to the global dialogue on sustainable development goals writ large. The kind of the breadth of approaches and methodologies and tools and techniques that we're using has kind of exploded over the past few years. Originally, we were just kind of thinking about design thinking or human-centered design, and we were doing some social innovation camps, and it's really taken on a life of its own, driven by the courage and the activities of our colleagues at the country office level. And this slide gives a sense of the breadth of the initiative, the methodologies, the approaches that our country office colleagues and national partners have been experimenting with. A lot of it you'll see is around data or is based on data. So there's the micronarratives, there's the real-time information systems, there's the remote sensing. A lot of this is dependent upon having good, reliable sources of data, but also being able to embrace new sources and analytics and visualization techniques and all of this to be able to make the most of the data and to be able to manage the explosion of data and data sources that has come about over the past few years. This year, as you probably know, the innovation facility is focusing on 4 thematic areas, or methodological areas rather, from the previous page, and alternative finance, behavioral insights, data innovation, and public sector innovation. And so I just wanted to give a couple of examples of the work that we're doing at the global level, and then talk specifically about some of the work that we're doing in the Arab states on data innovation. And before I get too far into it, I just wanted to give as a interesting fact this graphic. I don't know if people have seen this before, but it just talks about the proliferation of, well, first of all, technology, but then second of all, the amount of data that gets produced in any given minute. So 60 seconds, and there's 9,000 logins to Facebook. There are almost 1 million swipes on Tinder. It's the amount of data that gets produced as a result of these actions and interactions is overwhelming and astounding and scary and powerful all at the same time. And this is just in 60 seconds. And so that's what we're looking at in 2017. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting graphic. Obviously, that varies by country. I was talking to a number of colleagues earlier today about this graphic, and they said, well, that's all well and good, but in my country, Facebook is blocked, or Netflix is blocked, or Google is blocked. So it's obviously this is doesn't take into account population density or political circumstances, but it still gives a sense of the proliferation. I'm gonna go back to the chat box because Wilmer, while I'm giving the presentation, I can't hear you. So I guess, oops, you need to stop me. I don't know how you're going to stop me. I don't know, Fernando, maybe stop me through a Skype message or something like that if there are questions, or if I'm going off track or whatever. But since I can't hear you, we'll have to figure out some way to get a message from you to me. Thank you. Okay. Back to the presentation. All right. So I wanted to, before I get into the 2 different initiatives, I wanted to talk a little bit about data trends and data types. So in terms of data trends, it's, as you can see based on the previous slide, it's the explosion of different sources of data. So data coming from certainly all of our devices and our interactions, but data coming from very close to us in our palm, or remotely from remote sensors, or from drones, or from satellite imagery. All this data, close and far, but also passively generated versus actively generated. So interactions that we have where we kind of know that we're generating data is one thing, but then there's also all the data that gets generated in more of a passive way. So it's something to think about, and it relates to a couple of these other trends. This idea that data gets generated by us that we don't even really think about, or we don't know that it's being generated. Say, what are they called? Cameras in streets that are taking images of our faces, or when sidewalks that are feeling the steps of our feet as we walk across a crosswalk or we walk down a sidewalk, and all of that is getting monitored. Certainly, smart cities are the kind of epitome of that kind of data being generated in kind of a passive way. While the data sources have exploded, the data actors have also kind of proliferated. So every one of us becomes a data actor in a way. So to complement, I mean, traditionally a lot of the data has been generated by quote unquote official sources, government sources, but certainly there's now data being generated by a variety of actors that takes on a certain legitimacy or credibility now that it didn't necessarily have before. So whether that's citizen-generated data or citizen reporting, or civil society reporting, it becomes much more acceptable, and that data becomes more powerful within the whole conversation around data and data agency. The other thing, the third thing is, of course, everybody knows, is just that there's all sorts of new technologies that allow for data to be generated, data to be captured, data to be sliced and diced and analyzed and visualized. And so, yes, we're able to collect data from many more sources, but we're also able to use different kinds of technologies to be able to analyze the incredible amount of data and to be able to kind of make sense of it through the analysis and the interpretation, but also to be able to visualize it, to make it accessible to lots of audiences who might not otherwise kind of know what to do with all of that data or how to process that data intellectually or understand what it means for them. Number 4, I think, is the I don't know what to call it, the bugaboo, the one that's really tricky. We've had many conversations about within UNDP on the big data initiatives that we've been running with our partners internally, UN Global Pulse, as well as external actors, about the trade-off between data being generated by us and our lack of privacy that goes along with that data being generated and collected. And so there's been the balance that people, or the trade-off that people talk about between, okay, well, if you want better services, you're going to have to give up some data so that government or service providers have a better sense of what your needs are, what your priorities are, what the issues are. And that obviously becomes a very tricky issue, and I guess I don't necessarily believe that that's the right trade-off. I think it might be a false choice. I'm not sure that you have to give up your privacy to be able to get better services, or at least that you shouldn't have to be able to give up your data to get better services. And I think the scary element of this is the fact that the private sector is the sector that's collecting a lot. I don't know whether it's scary or whether it's the private sector that's collecting this kind of data or the public sector, but certainly the private sector is collecting a lot of this data, using a lot of this data, and it's not particularly regulated, their use of the data that we generate. So I think the proliferation of data sources and data actors, that's kind of a fact. I think the privacy issue is more a policy and open to debate, and I think that that's where UNDP has a significant role to play. The fifth one is around asymmetries, and this, I think, is also a really important place for UNDP to play, which is around the fact that a lot of data that, let's see, what do I want to say? The data that gets generated is of value, but the value then that citizens receive as a result of that data that gets generated is not necessarily proportionate to the value that is given. Meaning that a lot of this data is tech-driven or tech-enabled, and so it then becomes a little bit more the province of the elite, and maybe the benefits associated with that accrue to the elite rather than those who might not be tech-savvy. So if you're not tech-literate, or you don't have broadband or internet access to internet, are you being left out of the tech revolution and the data revolution? And I think that as we think about collecting data, whether it's big data or crowdsourced data, it's very important for us to think about how we involve and engage those who might not be part of that equation. And we'll get into a couple of examples where we're seeing different approaches to reaching those who might not otherwise have access or be able to benefit from the data revolution. Different types of data. I think I'll just spin through this really quickly, but because I imagine everybody's probably pretty familiar with this, but different types of data that we see and that we're using in our different data innovation projects. Certainly big data is the most popular, I would say. Open data, probably more on the government side. So data generally owned by government or residing with government entities, but that can be freely accessible, used, reused by anyone. So whether that's budget data from the government or whether it's service levels, making that data open to the public for them to have more kind of insight, transparency around government administration and action. Citizen-generated data, probably the best known for us anyway, in terms of citizen-generated data, is the My World survey. So people generating, providing input into the priorities around the 2030 agenda, 10 million people voting to voice their opinion, and us and our national partners using that data to be able to determine national priorities and then the international set of development goals. And then the last kind is around real-time data. And there's been a move away really from real-time data more to right-time data. Because the idea of real-time data is like, okay, we can have any data at any point in time whenever we want it, but that's way too much data. So there's now this movement towards right-time data, is being able to get data when you want it, to be able to have it when you're at the point of making a decision. Because you're not making a decision every day at the policy level, but being able to have it when you need it and frequently enough to be able to course correct or move in a different direction when you need to. So there's different data types. I guess now I want to move into the two initiatives that we've been working over the past couple of years on data innovation. Here we go. The first is something called the Guide to Data Innovation for Development. This is an initiative of the Innovation Facility that crossed a couple of regions, Arab states and Europe and Central Asia. And we had 3 of our country offices from each of the regions looking at how we might be able to use different kinds of data in any kind of context. So it was kind of fully open to them to decide how they wanted to think about data and in what context. We were working with Global Pulse, UN Global Pulse on this, and the idea was to have these 6 country offices, try their best to do something new and different, and we would have Global Pulse as our kind of technical advisor, and we would put together a guide at the end of it based on their experiences. And so I just wanted to run through the 3 different examples from the Arab states and then talk a little bit about the guide. So the first was Tunisia. So Tunisia, they decided they were going to just jump right into SDG 16. Forget the fact that that's, one of the most controversial SDGs. They decided they want to use, they wanted to be able to look at corruption specifically, which was one of the key drivers of the revolution. And what they wanted to do, they had kind of traditional data collection methods. They were using household surveys to understand people's perception of the corruption issue. And they wanted to be able to, household surveys they're expensive, they take a lot of time, and they're not done particularly frequently. And so what they wanted to do was to be able to see whether they could use social media as a way, almost like as a complement or a proxy to the household survey data, because collecting social media data off of Facebook and Twitter and blogs and fora is much less expensive than a household survey and is happening all the time. And so what they did was collect this data that was publicly available, and working with the National Statistics Institute, analyze this data to understand what public sentiment looked like and whether or not it was going to be consistent with the household survey data. And so part of me wanted it to be wildly different. Like, yes, we're looking at social media, and there's definitely, we're hitting, first of all, a different group, and I wanted to be able to say, look, if you look at this different data source, you can get additional insights or different kinds of insights than you can from a more traditional approach. But part of me also wanted it to come out exactly like the household survey so that they could feel very comfortable in using this different kind of approach to measuring corruption, or measuring public sentiment about corruption. And at the end of the day, the data basically came out and corroborated what the household survey had indicated. And so that household survey kind of acted as the ground truth. So kind of what was actually happening on the ground through this very expensive, exhaustive, comprehensive survey was then corroborated with collecting this data from social media. And so it was great because it turned out to be great because now they're able to use this on a much more frequent basis with less cost to be able to measure more frequently what the pulse is, what people are thinking about when they're thinking about it in terms of corruption, so that they can take more immediate action. They can take different kinds of action that responds to how their citizens are feeling about the topic. So they are continuing to move forward with this and continue to use it as a way to kind of feel the pulse. In Sudan, they wanted to look at the poverty rates at the subnational level. And the thing I like about the initiative in Sudan is that they tried and failed, and they tried and failed, and they tried again. And the fact that they wanted to explore different kinds of ways to measure poverty at the subnational level. So they said, great, let's look at energy consumption. Or they were looking at energy top-ups first, and then, okay, more generally, energy consumption. And they got that data, and they kind of overlaid it with what they already knew at the subnational level, and there wasn't a strong enough correlation. It wasn't working. So they said, okay, let's do nighttime lights. We can use satellite imagery. We'll collect all that data. We'll do the overlay. We'll do the correlation. Nope, it didn't work. So now they're using mobile phone usage, so looking at call detail records, and looking at people's usage, their usage patterns, and their movement, and correlating that to what they know at the subnational level. And this, we feel like we're on the right track now. So this is 2+ years into the process. And I think that in addition to their kind of perseverance and their willingness to try out different approaches, I think another lesson from Sudan is the fact that the process of getting the data has been incredibly difficult. They go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. But they have been working quite hard to kind of build a strong enough relationship with their national partners between the government and the telcos to be able to release this data and to be able to analyze this data. And the process of data innovation and working with data is a very political process. And I think that's where we ended up with the guide is realizing that we wanted to focus on how to get from idea to prototype, because it's kind of defining what the problem is, defining what your data availability looks like, and working with your national partner is 90% of the effort. You know, crunching the data and doing the analytics, once you get the problem right and once you get the political aspect of it managed, then the rest of it kind of flows freely. But the first part of it really is a bear, and Sudan was particularly they had to persevere quite a bit to be able to get to where they are. Egypt was our third country, and they went a completely different route. They wanted to use remote sensors to be able to gather meteorological and agricultural data to be able to help farmers with better farming practices and irrigation practices. So they wanted to be able to gather information about the temperature, precipitation, the humidity, the soil composition from their network of farmers across the country, and then be able to work with the Ministry of Agriculture to analyze that data and be able to help farmers know better when's the optimal time to plant, when's the optimal time to harvest, when should they be rotating crops, if there's any kind of pestilence or this sort of thing that they should be aware of. So it was all remote sensor data that then was fed in on a real-time basis to Cairo, and then analyzed and fed back to the farmers who their farms had generated the data in the first place. So we looked at corruption, we looked at poverty, we looked at agriculture, with 3 very different kinds of data sources, and that then led us to the publication of the guide. And as I mentioned, it was more about kind of defining what the problem statement is, what the hypothesis is, and what the data sources are, and getting ready to initiate a data innovation project that we found that would be most helpful in capturing in the guide. And so this is the table of contents for the guide. You can see that there are a number of different tools along that kind of prep phase, I would say, that we found to be particularly useful based on the experience we had with these 6 countries. Okay, I'm going to go to the second initiative, which has just kicked off last week. So not too much longer will I be talking. So this is about the measurement of the SGG Tier 3 indicators. So you can see this is as of, well, now it's almost a year old, so it's slightly different now, but basically the concept of the Tier 3 indicator, the tiers, is that one, we understand the indicator and we've got a methodology for measuring it. 2, we have a methodology, but we're not really sure we're going to get the data. And 3 is, we don't have a methodology, we don't have standards, we don't have a framework, we have no idea how we're going to measure this. And that is fertile ground for innovation. And so while people are wringing their hands about the Tier 3 indicators, we are excited about the possibility of trying different kinds of approaches for measuring different Tier 3 indicators. And it's such a huge number, almost 40% of the indicators are sitting at Tier 3. How are we possibly going to report on SDGs and the 2030 agenda writ large if we have a third or more of the indicators that we can't measure? And so we thought that this would be a great opportunity for different country offices around the world to identify different indicators and develop different innovation methodologies. So these are the different countries that are participating in the process. You can see that the distribution of targets or indicators, and that there's kind of a preponderance around 16.6 too, particularly. And I think that it's about the citizens' perception of government services. And perception is particularly tricky to measure, as opposed to something that's kind of more objectively verifiable. And so we're excited that we have a number of different countries in a variety of contexts looking at this, because we want to be able to use the results of the innovative approaches that these country offices take to be able to feed back into the global dialogue around SDG measurement. So we've been working with the Oslo Governance Center on SDG 16, and we had them at our kickoff meeting last week in Istanbul, and really see great opportunity for looking at those SDG 16 initiatives. I can't tell you yet exactly how each of the different country offices are going to end up measuring this, but we basically have a 4.5-month window for the country offices, 5-month window for the country offices to put in place some kind of test that they want to try out to be able to measure these and show kind of a proof of concept that they were able to use that particular methodology, those particular data sources, this kind of analysis to get to some kind of insight, whether it's around SDG 16 or 10 on inequalities or on wastewater treatment in Egypt. So we've got a variety of indicators, and I'm sure we're going to end up with a variety of different approaches, and so we're really excited about this one, but I don't have the innovations yet to share with you, so stay tuned on that one. I think that maybe just to sum up, well, let me go back to this. There's a lot of data running around, and we're really excited to be able to tap into it as part of our development process, whether it's used for planning, for implementing, for monitoring and evaluation. And I think that probably one of the underlying or the overarching messages is that we really want citizens to be engaged in the process of producing data, of being able to take advantage of the value of that data. And so hearing from them, being able to feed back to them, understanding what their needs are on a very real basis, and it's called thick data, and I'll get to that in a sec. But really being able to reach out to as many and as kind of reaching out to those on the margin and the periphery, those who might not have been involved in these kinds of processes before, and making sure that they're involved in this data revolution, and particularly as we're using it for development planning and implementation. And this last slide is just something we've been thinking about in terms of this evolution from big data to thick data. So not getting overwhelmed by the data or distracted by the data, but kind of moving from all this data into more meaningful data, which is what we're calling thick data, to really understand better what's behind the data and the people behind the data. And so it's kind of the next thing that we're seeing in terms of data innovation and the data revolution. So with that, why do we innovate? Here's our plan. There's reality. It's never the same. You need to be able to see what people actually do, and you need to be able to adjust. And so that's what we do at the Innovation Facility. That's it.
Thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, Jennifer cannot hear us, but so let's start to write down our question about presentation just in the chat, please.
Do you want me to answer Gonzalo's question? All right. Gonzalo has a question around, in terms of corruption and really any topic, how do you account for self-censorship in household surveys as opposed to social media? I guess there's self-censorship in any media, so whether it's in a survey or in social media. And I guess what I mean by that is that in social media, it's people who would be talking about corruption on social media are a specific group of people who feel like they can talk about corruption on social media, where their identity is known, mostly. And so those people who might really be most threatened by an issue such as corruption probably wouldn't talk about it on social media. So, for example, with the Sudan work and looking at the SGG 1662 around government services, they were talking about, let's do some SMS surveys and exit polls and this kind of thing, and we thought that it might not capture people's real perception of the survey. And so we wanted to kind of catch people in more unguarded moments. And so we're going to be looking at kind of where people congregate and talk already about these kinds of issues. And so we're probably going to be collecting data on audio off of radio talk shows, and we may seed those with issues around corruption, or we may just look at the data that, or the conversations that they have without any kind of seeding. But we're able to capture all of that audio and then be able to analyze it, to look at what the sentiment analysis is. This is a long question.
Yeah.
All right, so before I answer Gabriella's question, Gonzalo, why would they use the household survey as a control? I think that the household survey probably is the best bet they have in terms of what the ground truth is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to. I don't know what else they might be able to use to establish what the baseline is in that instance. Other things that we've been using that I think are kind of interesting to establish baselines are micro-narratives. I'm not sure if the group is familiar with them, but it's basically a collection of hundreds or thousands of stories from individuals about a particular topic. We've been using it in Jordan to understand people's perceptions or feelings around employment opportunities or economic opportunities, particularly in those communities that are hosting Syrian refugees. And so it's kind of a free-flowing questionnaire that we ask, but there are particular prompts that we use, and then we're able to collect this in such a way that we use a tool called SenseMaker that makes sense of these thousands of stories that we get collected, and it gives us a sense of what perception is, and we're using that as a baseline, doing our intervention, and then coming back and having the same group plus others tell their story as well, and see what kind of movement we have in terms of perception. So it's a different way of getting at a ground truth, I guess. Maybe that's a little bit different than a household survey. And the way that those micro-narratives are designed and the interactions are designed, we do our best to have the self-censorship kind of removed by coming at the topic not directly, but kind of through different side doors. Gabriella's question is, I'm not 100% sure. Gabriella, your question is, are there initiatives? Are there initiatives developed to? Okay, I'm going to read Gabriella's question. When we think about data and the recognition of data actors, it will be important to recognize roles associated with those actors, and important to think about generating data, but also to analyze, digest, and communicate these data. Are there initiatives developed under this approach? One of the feedback provided by country offices was the expectation to have the regional center play that role. You know, in terms of an initiative in Arab states, we've got the Arab Development Portal. So the Arab Development Portal collects data on the SDGs from all 18 countries, and is a way to kind of as a repository for all these different data sources and different ways to slice and dice that data. But it's not really doing the digesting. It's doing the what's the right word? Putting into various taxonomies and being able to help others use that data. So whether that's students, whether that's media, whether that's government partners in NSOs or NSIs, to be able to use that data. It's loads and loads of data across the region that's collected there, and the initiative, the Arab Development Portal initiative, does a lot of capacity building with NSIs, with the media. They just finished up a 4-day 2030 visualization hackathon where they brought in teams from 14 different countries around the region to work on visualizing the 2030 data that resides or using the data that resides in the Arab Development Portal. I'll send a link in the chat box when we finish to the Arab Development Portal, or send it to Wilmer and Fernando, and maybe they can share it. So we do have a regional program that supports that. It's which is part of the regional hub. And then I think Javier had a question. How easy do you see the collaboration with private sector and other UN agencies? The private sector is kind of critical to the work that we're doing, because mostly the data that we're looking for sits with the private sector. It will sit with the telco, or it will sit with, it could sit with Facebook, it could sit with Google. We've been working with, we have partnerships with a number of private sectors. We've also, at a global level, I think we've signed an agreement or an MOU or something with the GSMA to be able to help with providing access to telecom data, which is the lion's share of the data that we've been looking at, big data that we've been looking at for these various initiatives.
Okay, anyone else have questions to take advantage of Jennifer? And well, just in case, if you are interested in knowing a little bit more about any of the projects presented by Jennifer, please reach out to us, to Wilmer and I here at the Regional Hub. We can be the bridge between the regions in order to explore different options, to share this kind of information and apply in your projects at the country level. I'm not sure if we have more questions. Take advantage of Jennifer's time just there. Anyone else? Ah, voy a dar por hecho que no hay más.
Just to say thank you, Wilmer and Fernando. It was great talking at you. Sorry that we didn't have a chance to hear each other, but thank you.
Sí, sí. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this webinar. As you know, we had a particular issue in terms of the communication just there with Jennifer in Oman. But again, please reach out to us if you have any question and if you want to explore more in detail about these experiences and try to apply this information or these methodologies on your projects at your country offices. So thank you again, and let's keep in contact for our next webinar. We are going to launch in a couple of weeks. So bye-bye.
Thank you.